I don't know about you, but there are experiences that I have in my life, so both positive and negative, that seem to, when I reflect back on them, or maybe even sometimes when I am experiencing them, I think to myself, what were the odds of that happening? Like, how did that literally, with all the things happening all over the place and any external factors that may impact what's happening, how did that really just happen? So I'm going to give you one example, and you guys might have things like this that happen in your life, and you can kind of reflect on that if this story gets boring. But I was golfing, and this was a while ago, because it was at McClinney's Golf Club, which no longer exists. So 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, who knows? But I was with Doug Cooley, and we were actually talking last night because I was asking him about this story because we're not 100% sure who the person was that hit the golf ball. But he was in the trees. So like there's this line of trees right here, and he's in the trees, and the flag's up there. And so he's getting up, and he's going to hit it around this tree, which if you don't play golf, not advised to think that you can hit it around a tree. But so that was what we were going to do. So Doug Cooley was in the cart, and he could see, you know, how geometry works with angles, and he's going to hit the tree, and it's going to come back and hit him. So being the wise individual that he is, he gets in the golf cart, and he starts taking the golf cart way around wide over here on the right-hand side so as not to get hit. So this imaginary person, we've narrowed it down to 3 people, but they, you know, get their little waggle going, hit it as Doug is concurrently driving the cart over here, almost get it around the tree, but not quite, thus changing the angle and making it almost a 90-degree angle. So I'm watching this unfold, and Cooley's driving over here in the golf cart, and this guy hits the golf ball, and it shoots this way, and I'm looking at Doug, and I'm looking at the golf ball. Obviously, this happens really quickly, so I'm processing this now, but I'm like, oh, this is not going to be good. So like golf ball skewing off a tree, Doug driving, I can see these two like meeting at the same point, and us being at McClinney's hospital or something like that. And so Doug's driving, and the golf ball literally goes through his moving cart, but doesn't hit him. And he bailed, and luckily golf carts stop on their own when you get off the gas. Otherwise, it had just kept going. But I'm looking at this, I'm like, how did that just, what are the odds of that? Like, we could do this all day, and there's no way that would ever happen again if we planned it. And so I'm glad, you know, that Doug's not got a golf ball sized welt on his head or anything like that. But I have experienced different things like that. Like when it happens, I'm like, what? How did that happen? What are the chances that that could ever be done again? It's so perfect when they don't get hit by the golf ball. And so we're going to look today at Galatians chapter 4, and Paul's going to talk about the perfect timing of Jesus coming, of God sending Jesus at the exact perfect time. And so when I think, you know, maybe this is my immaturity, when I think of perfect timing, I think about those things that, like, you just can't even explain how amazing that was, that it was the only way that it could have happened that way. So we're going to be in Galatians chapter 4. It's page 1170 if you are using the Pew Bible. As you turn there, the very beginning of chapter 4, Paul begins, what I am saying is... So when you hear the beginning of that sentence, you need a little bit of context, because basically what we're about to read is his clarification of something that he just said. So you don't have to do this, but you're welcome to turn back one page, and I'm just going to read you a couple verses before that. Chapter 3, verse 26. Paul says, so in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So that's what he stated, and now he's clarifying it again in chapter 4. What I am saying is that as long as an heir is underage, he is no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. The heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. So also, when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our heart, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. So a little context on that. Paul is talking to the church at Galatia and trying to prevent the Jews from convincing them that they had to do all the Jewish traditions to become a follower of Christ. So he's trying to convince them, circumcision is not a requirement to be a follower of Christ. This law and these stipulations that some of the people are telling you have to follow, that is not correct. And so he makes a little kind of story here and talks about in Jewish tradition there's an age at which you move from being a child to being an adult. But in Greek society, it was really up to the parents or up to the father when they decided that the child was ready to move into adulthood. So in verse 4, when Paul talks about when the time had fully come, he's kind of referencing back to verse 2 when he talks about the set time. Whatever the father determined was the appropriate time or the set time, that is when you move from childhood to adulthood and when you went from being an heir to actually being an owner. I read a lot of things about verse 4 and about the set time. And there are tons and tons of explanations about what Paul means by the set time. There are people who believe that the set time was set because Rome had really become a great empire and they had built roads everywhere, so now it was an appropriate time for God to send Jesus because the word could spread out. And I personally feel like God's probably bigger than roads, but maybe that's, correct in their mind. And there's other people that believe society had gotten so bad that God had no other choice but to send Jesus at that time. And we can reflect back on the flood and things like that. So really where I kind of fell is God is sovereign. God's understanding of time is way more gigantic than our understanding of time, and us trying to figure out, well, it was this day because, and it was this time because, and this happened, so God is probably just a fruitless endeavor. So trying to figure out why this time or what exactly Paul means by the time had fully come is missing the point completely. What we see in this explanation is we see that God made a decision that this was the time. Why he did it, it's up to him because he's God. One thing that I get to do in my current position with the school board is I get to go in and I get to teach other teachers' classes and have them watch. So something that Paul says that is really significant is that not only did Jesus come when the time had fully come, or that God sent Jesus when the time had fully come, but that he was born of a woman and born under the law. So basically that's reiterating to us that Jesus came as a human being like ourselves. I go into other teachers' classes. I help them work with some of their students and sometimes get the opportunity to teach for them. And what I have learned through this process is teachers have classes that are really great and good and classes that are really rough and not so good. No teacher wants my help to teach a class that's really good. If their class is rocking and rolling and they're getting everything right and they know what's happening and everybody's a great kid, they don't want to see me teach that class. They love that class. That's the class they get up for. That's the class that they want to teach every day, all the time. What they want to see is me handle their rough class, or me teach the kids that just don't understand, or the kids that won't sit down, or the kids that won't be quiet. And I will now, lesson learned, make sure that I ask them beforehand, what's the class you have the most concern about? What's the class that gives you the most issues? And then I will specifically go and work with that class, work with those students. Because a teacher is constantly trying to get better and find new ways to connect to students and new ways to get the information out. And if they can't see me in that same role, I'm useless. I'm just some guy that has a badge that comes in and teaches the good kids, and everybody can teach the good kids, so what did I learn today? And so I think it's significant that we see and that Paul clarifies Jesus came and experienced stuff just like we did. Jesus came as a human being, as a baby, grew up just like we showed up as human beings, as babies, and grew up. He experienced some of the things that we experience, though clearly our context is different. But this is not someone that doesn't understand our concerns, that doesn't understand what we go through. I think about Princess Diana, and I was just sort of kind of growing up and becoming aware of news and things like that when she was killed. But I think about all the outpouring of support and the love that existed for her. And when you go and read about her, a lot of people will refer to her as the people's princess. You know, that she wasn't high and mighty and on top of something and detached from the regular people. She was one of them. She is one of us. There's this connection with people when they've gone through the same things that we have, when they have experienced our struggles. You know, we've talked about at other times, sometimes we go through valleys and we go through tough times so that at another point down the road, we can help somebody else. That's not always the most comforting thing to hear when your life's falling apart. Like, hey, maybe this will help somebody in a few years. But it is something that we experience. It is something that maybe when we reflect back on a tough time, when we reflect back on something that really stunk in our lives when we were going through it, and then we have the opportunity to kind of counsel somebody else through it or share our experiences with somebody else, then we kind of get that hindsight and we can step back and see, you know, that experience that I went through, while it was no fun at all, was something that was able to help this other person get through their experience a little better. A second part of that in verse 4, but when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. Redeem is one of my favorite words because you always get something awesome when you redeem it. Like coupon codes and cereal boxes and different things like that. I mean, here, take this and redeem it for, and you get something for free. And it's usually just like a sheet of paper or a piece of cardboard or something like that. And I get free stuff for something that is seemingly useless. So I think about this process of redemption. And I'm kind of sports minded, so I think about, you know, the hated kicker, the one that's not even really a football player. He probably played soccer. You know, but he has a chance to redeem himself. He missed the 31-yarder in the second quarter, but now there's 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter, and he can kick this 51-yard field goal, and everyone will mob him, and they'll love him, and he redeemed himself. But when I look at the verse, I see it is not possible for us to redeem ourselves. It is only through God's decision to send Jesus that we have the opportunity to be redeemed. It is through his sacrifice, it is through his willingness to send his only begotten Son that gives us that opportunity for redemption. And I think I have struggled with it some, and I know other people that have done so even more, but people that are really independent. People that really want to do themselves and conquer and go and to think about the fact that you can't do it. You can't be good enough. You can't be kind enough. You can't be nice enough. You cannot do it. That's a really difficult climb for some people to make. But it's that release, it's that ability to say, God, you handle it. I can't do it by myself. So if you are interacting with people that are not followers of Christ, that are dealing with that, be supportive in that. Understand that maybe for you or maybe for other people, it's really easy to say, oh, I know I can't do it. But for others, myself included, that's kind of a tough thing to process. Like, I should be able to do this. If I put my mind to it, if I do this, if I make a list, if I do this, I'm going to be able to accomplish it. It's just not possible. So be supportive in those relationships to make sure that you're not saying, oh, silly little guy over there who thinks you can do it. You know you can't do it. You know, have those conversations and make sure that you're sharing your own experiences about what it's like to finally understand, I can't do it, but God is ready and willing to do it for me. The next part of the verse, when it talks about verse 5, to redeem those under the law that we might receive adoption to sonship. I think about adoption. And Murray Hill has adopted Upson. And, there are companies that adopt a new motto or mission statement or things like that. But adoption is like a really weird idea in my head to go from being completely disconnected and uninvolved to now being treated as part of the family, as adoption to sonship. So I did an interview this week with my cousins who adopted a child 9 years ago, and I asked them a couple questions, so we're going to share that right now. Hi, Murray Hill Baptist. This is my cousin Davey and cousin Ruthie. They live in South Carolina, and they have experienced adoption firsthand, and so I'm on a FaceTime call with them before you are seeing this earlier this week. Because I wanted to ask them a few questions about things that they have experienced and lessons that they've learned and some different ideas and changes that they've gone through because of that process. So, Davey, Ruthie, thank you for doing this for me. All right, we'll start with the first question. First, why did you choose to pursue adoption?
It's really something that we had talked about before we ever had our first child biologically. It was very early in our marriage. It was always going to be an international adoption. Somebody asked me one time why, and I said nothing else ever occurred to us. And I think if we were supposed to do something else, God would have let us know. But we ended up having 3 children biologically, and had still talked about adoption through the years. And when we thought, I think maybe it's time to add another one to the family, and we started looking a little more seriously into it, and honestly got cold feet, decided that the money part of it was going to stop us, and I was going to have another child. And when I thought more about that, no. So ended up meeting somebody at church who ended up being a dear friend, but they were in the process of adopting as well from China at the time. And I went and saw David, and I said, if they can do it, we can do it. And so that kind of really went from there. We started, it was all very much God speaking to us in small ways at that point.
And you guys got to adopt Joshua, and you've had him in your family now for numerous years. What are some things about adoption that you've experienced that you wouldn't have believed if someone had told you before, or maybe what is something that's completely different now that you have done it than maybe you thought about beforehand?
What was so interesting for me, to be honest, because you have all of these questions in the back of your mind. You know, we have these three amazing children, and it's how a child that's born in a third world country and spent the first year of his life, just how is that going to work? How is he going to integrate? And I always thought of it from the perspective of us, our family, and really didn't give a lot of thought, quite honestly. And that was just immaturity on my part. Josh's perspective on the whole thing as a toddler coming into this brand new situation, and he really struggled. For the first year, he was not really excited about the whole situation. He didn't sleep well, and he had a lot of unrest. And I had never really considered that. I was totally selfish and was thinking in a perspective of what is it going to be like for David and the family, right? And for Josh, it took a tremendous amount of adjustment. I mean, we took him out of everything that was familiar to him and dropped him. I don't know if you remember or not, but unveiled him to the family on Thanksgiving morning, right?
Yeah.
He thought he had landed on.
Not supposed to do that.
He thought he had landed on Mars. So it was pretty. It took time for him to get used to us. Quite honestly, it truly did. For us, it seemed seamless, honestly, except trying to cajole him and make him feel comfortable. There really wasn't a lot of difference for us, and that was surprising to me, just how seamless God made it.
How do you feel like you better understand God's choice to adopt us now that you have experienced adoption yourself?
Makes it real, makes it concrete. That's such an abstract thought if you've not been a part. I know that one thing I've heard from people is, I want to adopt, but my husband doesn't want to. He doesn't think that he can love somebody else's child as much as we would love one of our own biological children. And there's no truth to that whatsoever. I would kill somebody for one of my other children. I would kill somebody for him. I mean, the same thing. He's my baby. It doesn't matter where he came from, and knowing that about me, that makes it even better to think that way about God and me. That He loves me that much. He cares about me so much that He's willing to bring me in to His family from somewhere else, no matter where that was, and how bad that may have been, or how good that may have been. No matter who we are, everybody's got a different story, but I think it's just the realness of it, of something biblical playing out in real life. That's it.
And it really clarified for me, Jay, the whole notion of God loving us before we ever are, right? Before we're ever a being, God loves us. And that's a struggle. You're wrapping your head around that concept. And just to love a little kid that you've never laid eyes on, I'll sit here and tell your congregation it's absolutely possible. I loved Josh before I ever laid eyes on him, and that to me it really brought clarity to that whole scenario. Josh came into our house. We adopted him. He immediately, in the eyes of human parents, started to misbehave, right? And we couldn't, despite our best efforts, we couldn't get him to act right some days. But it's still our responsibility to grow him up and mature him and turn him to some degree into the little man that he has become. Same situation for God. We're saved by His glory, but behavior doesn't necessarily change the next day as much as we'd like it to, right? So I envision God being way more patient with me than I am with Josh. I think in terms of patience and trying to get this kid to do what I want him to do, right? Not because he's adopted, but just because I love him. And I think that's just an absolute parallel to our relationship with God. He just wants us to embrace His Word and improve every single day, and has that acceptance when we don't, right? And that to me, it really brings such clarity. It's amazing.
And the lengths that we were willing to go to get him here in our family. And because I thought, stupidly, not inexperiencedly, that, this was going to be much easier than being pregnant for 9 months. No, no. There were all kinds of, I had to write in black ink. Nothing could be misspelled. The date had to be a certain way. There couldn't be whiteout. You couldn't, if you made a mistake, you had to start over again with that piece of paper. It was crazy. So the hoops that we'll go through, but the lengths that we would go through to get that little boy home to us. And I was actually willing to go to Antigua and foster him at one point. David said, no. And I was going to take the other three, and we were going to homeschool, and I was going to go foster him in Antigua because I wanted to get my hands on him. But that's the other cool thing. I mean, how much does God want to get his hands on us? As much as that's what I remember so much of the adoption. It's just wanting to get my arms around him. And if I think about that from God's point of view, how much he wants to get his arms around us, no matter what we're like, no matter that we're going to pitch a fit and not sleep well and have digestive issues and backtalk you when he gets to be 10 sometimes. So he still wants you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your firsthand account, and thanks so much for your time. This was all very informative, and I think will help us all.
All right, man. We love you.
Love you too. So that's Josh, and then their biological children. I had to cut out some of the interview. They had a great story about somebody in Walmart asking them if he knew that he was adopted. She was like, yeah, he knows. We're very white, he's very brown. He's clear on the process. I think there's two big takeaways that I got from that interview. The first is, in the case of Josh, adoption didn't happen because of Josh. It happened because of Davy and Ruthie. God's decision to bring us into his family has nothing to do with us and everything to do with him and his desire to connect with us and to love us and to give us all the amazing things that come along with being a son. And the second is, Davy and Ruthie didn't go looking for a good kid. They didn't interview and say, what's his temperament like and what's he going to look like? Let me talk to his mom. Let me talk to his dad. Let me see if this is a good fit with our family. They went looking for a kid. So I've had numerous conversations with people who I believe are on the path to getting connected to God, and they'll say things, well, I can't go to church. The roof would cave in if I was there. Come meet some of the people that go to church here. Let me tell you some of my backstory. And guess what? The roof still stands. We are here together as a community of believers, as a group of people that will loudly tell you we don't get it right all the time. But we are a part of a family where our Father is number one in the business when it comes to grace. Always offers forgiveness. Makes the sacrifice of sending his Son in our place. So if you are on that path to connecting with God, to trying to figure out what it means to be a follower of Jesus, I believe that God has been and will be putting people in your life to have conversations with you, to have interactions with you, to model the love of God, to listen when you have questions, to not act as if they know it all, but that they are also in the process of getting to know God better. And if you are a follower of Christ, you are the person I just described. You are being put into situations where you get the opportunity to show the love of God, where you get the opportunity to listen to people, to bear their struggles, to share times when it didn't make sense and when you didn't understand. But your decision to trust has taught you lessons, has taught you different things that you're now able to share and that are now able to be fleshed out in your life. So wherever you fall in that continuum, this season, this Christmas time can be for you when the time had fully come. That you decide, today, I want to make Jesus number one in my life. Admittingly understanding that we don't necessarily understand what that means. But each day, each hour that we connect with God, that we interact with other people that are farther down the road than us, we get to know a little bit more and understand things a little better. Let's pray.